Hello, and welcome to the Unscripted Pharmacist Podcast. Today, I have a special guest, Dr. Anthony Chaffee. He is a neurosurgical resident. He'll tell us where he's doing that. But he has been in this space, in this carnivore space, actually for a long, long time, as he's learned how to fuel his body and prepare and be competitive as a rugby player. So not only is he looking at this from a professional standpoint, but also from a personal standpoint, as essentially what is the best way to fuel his body. He's known for an amazing talk, and I probably definitely something that I have repeated over and over again and pushed me a little bit closer to the edge until finally I said, okay, I'm going to try this carnivore thing. But he's known for an amazing talk. It's plants are trying to kill you, you know, like it was a really important talk. And I took a lot of pieces home with that and said, okay, this makes total sense. How can I change my own life? And for you, I mean, I really need to thank you for what you've done for me personally, because this is you and many other pioneers in this field have said, hey, this is an alternative to for me, it was a ketogenic diet, which I did for years. And I finally switched over because of people like you, Sean Baker, Brian Sanders, and just looking at all the evidence. And I want to get into some of this evidence. I know you're such an amazing history buff in like the diet and history, bringing it together. I think it would be a really good movie. But anyways, welcome, Dr. Chaffee.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's great to see you.
Yeah.
I was just going to say too. So it's called a neurosurgical registrar, which is sort of like a resident in the U.S. But it's sort of the same sort of thing. But at the moment, I've just sort of switched gears. So I'm not working in neurosurgery at the moment. So I've sort of put that on hold. Overseas, you can actually do that. In America, you're just like you go through until you're done, or else you're out.
Really? Okay.
So I've been doing a metabolic health practice now. Sort of optimizing people, their health, and diet and lifestyle, nutrition. That becomes a big part of that. It's really nice to be able to apply these principles to my patient population and see chronic diseases that are still right now considered irreversible. Cannot put them into remission. It's only going to be medication for the rest of your life, and it's only going to get worse. And we're seeing the exact opposite of that. And so that's been really really, really fulfilling. And eventually we'll get back into neurosurgery. But there was a friend of mine who owned this practice. He was sort of had to retire. I was sort of forced into retirement, and it would have had to drop the whole practice and left a lot of people in the lurch. And so I just put things down for a bit and took over just to help them out.
Fantastic. I bet that's so rewarding.
It is
amazing, huh? What do you use? What do you use? What's your walk me through your? I mean, you obviously look at labs very carefully. Mm-hmm. You inspire people like you do normally, but what else?
Well, it's always individual for each individual patient. A lot of people coming in for different reasons. A lot of it's through word of mouth. Like we don't advertise or anything like that. I don't use my social media channel to advertise or anything like that. I don't sort of mix those two. And so a lot of it's word of mouth. And so people have just been sort of let down by the traditional standard of practice. They're going to their doctors, they're going to primary care or the GP, and they're saying, "Hey, look, I don't feel well. I'm not feeling good. I'm putting on weight. I'm not feeling great." And they just give this sort of standard, "Well, look, all your bloods look fine, and just eat less, move more, and all that sort of stuff." And they just get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And doctors see this too, because they see the same patient for 30 years. And they're only getting sicker. They're only getting worse. All their patients are only getting worse. And now they start getting sick and they're like, holy shit, it's happening to me. And I have no idea how to stop this train. And there's a lot of burnout. There's a lot of burnout in the profession because you just sort of realize that sort of futile, you're not doing any good, and so a lot of people burn out. There's a high suicide rate in medicine. And then, when you sort of address this in a different approach, and people start getting better and they start improving, obviously that's very rewarding. A lot of doctors are sort of revitalizing their careers and stop being burnt out because they're like, okay, it actually works now. I can actually do something that helps people. So I'm dealing with those people. I'm dealing with the people that the normal medical approach hasn't worked for. And the
Totally
whole
failed.
and eat less, move more doesn't work. And
Yeah. Can't
which is
outrun a bad diet.
you can't. Yeah, no.
How is it going with convincing doctors to say that they're wrong? It's not really
Mm,
fair. I really just feel like
yeah.
we've all been victims. We've been
Mhm.
victims of a horrible narrative here. And it's I find that either for myself as well as other physicians, feeling like you've been betrayed and kind of duped and lied to.
Mm.
Are you
Yeah. Well,
are you finding that with
yeah.
when you it's almost like you need a physician training
Mhm.
course, you know?
Well, yeah. I mean, there are things out there. I mean, like even just the keto, all the science and evidence behind like ketogenic approaches to things. Like the Nutrition Network. That's Professor Tim Noakes's project down in South Africa. I mean, it's an actual like university course. That you're with textbook and
Yeah,
all, and it's extremely heavy in the science and biochemistry and the research. And so
right.
there's a ton of evidence out there. There's a ton of information out there, but it's not being taught in medical schools because medical schools are largely capture. They have a lot of corporate capture. So the food and drug companies basically own the medical schools and the research institutions and the
Yeah,
universities because they pay and fund a lot of their research. And that's just basically a bribe. Hey, we'll give you all this money to your research and your medical school and your this. Um, but they really absolutely influence the curriculum as well. And it's even the veterinary world. I talk to vets, and there's just like the
huh,
curriculum in veterinary school is driven by the pet food companies. And you know who owns the pet food? Most of the pet food manufacturer is the human junk food companies like Mars. So like Mars bars, like they own most of the pet food that
Mars,
gets put out there.
really?
Mars. Yeah, and
What
so
the hell?
you have this
Making
massive.
our pet sick.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, they're getting all the diseases we get. We're getting like feline lupus and like doggy diabetes. When people are injecting their dog with insulin, when the hell has that ever happened? Well,
Cats. I know,
probably
it's
happening all
gross.
the time. It's just bizarre. But so there's this huge corporate capture of the medical institutions. Doctors are being trained to just be basically, the frontline, salesmen, the sales reps just out here pushing medications. Or you could think about it, the drug dealers on the corner, they're just the front man, that you interact with to get this product. And
Yeah,
that's what a lot of people do. Like, oh, I'm sick, I need to go get medicine. How do you do that? You go to a doctor. That's the intermediary, right? Okay, well, I want to get,
uh,
someone wants to go and get drugs and get high. What do? You go to the drug dealer. That's the
right,
intermediary between them and the
right.
cartels. So it's the same
Takes
sort of thing. It's the same paradigm. They're just drug cartels. It's just that they happen to be legal. And but it's the same model. Get people sick, or get people hooked to their product, have them on for the rest of their life, and you keep getting that return customer. So you
right.
get kids eating sugar. There's sugar in baby formula, things like that. They get them hooked from birth.
Nestle.
And
Yes.
yeah, and then they're sugar addicts for the rest of their life, and they get sick. They get diabetes at 8, some kids, and all of a sudden now you're on diabetes medications for the rest of your life. I mean, it's extremely profitable to get
Right.
people sick and get them sick early and get them dependent on these drugs. Goldman Sachs, got was leaked, had some things leaked about saying like, is it really a good business model to cure people of diseases? And the answer was, of course, no, because if you cure the disease, you only get to treat them once. But if you
Right.
just treat the symptoms and never address the root cause, then you can treat them for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And there's a company, Gilead, which I remember seeing in my intern year, 2013, that
Gilead.
they came out with a cure for hepatitis C. And I was like, whoa, that's great. These guys are doing great. I wasn't even thinking about like, oh, maybe this is something I should invest in. They're actually going for cures. That's a big deal. And
Mhm.
and Goldman Sachs had the opposite notion with them. They sent them this missive basically saying, you really messed up. You never try to cure a disease. You just get a
Wow.
treatment that allows people to live with the disease for the rest of their life, so you can get this return on investment. And there's the memos available, but there's, if not an explicit, there's at least an implicit statement there saying that like, look, if you're making these stupid business practices, you're not going to get investors and things like that. So
Yeah.
it's these groups are pushing for not getting cures. They're pushing to just treat the symptoms and to make doctors this intermediary. So, I mean, they know what's going on. They could go for cures. They're choosing not to, and they're using the medical establishment as their front men for this, and to make it look all dressed up. It's just like a money laundering operation. It looks legit. It's just like, oh yeah, we're trying to help, and we're trying to cure disease. No, you're not. No, you're not. Gilead did, but you're not.
Gilead makes remdesivir. I hate.
Oh, do they? Oh, Jesus Christ!
Yeah. That's what I was like. That's the worst company ever.
Well, but that's the thing too. Maybe they took that to heart. They got that thing. It's like, hey, you need to change what you're doing. Don't try to cure things. Just try to do whatever.
Well, they did a good job on not curing anything. It was supposed to, that remdesivir was supposed to like knock COVID in its tracks, right?
Yeah.
But I don't even. Yeah. It didn't do anything other than hurt people. I remember in the hospital, you would give that drug, and all of a sudden they'd be bradycardic. They would, their heart rate would really drop. Or you go like, what happened to this person's liver function test? Their liver is taking a hit. What is going on? I don't know if you saw that in the hospital during COVID, but it was awful. Like, and we're paying for this drug, and we're paying for the complications of this drug, and it doesn't do anything. I think it reduces symptoms by a portion of it. It's kind of like the Tamiflu. Yeah. And there was two studies. One showed it might be helpful. The other one showed it wasn't. Like, that's what we go off of?
Yeah, exactly.
So, American Diabetes Association, this is my pet peeve. Mm-hmm. When I started working as a diabetes educator, it was all about, okay, know the guidelines. You got to know the guidelines. Follow the guidelines. Diabetes is a progressive disease. Eventually, you're going to end up on insulin. You get some education. Your A1C is 9. We start you on insulin. I've seen so many patients, and you've probably seen it as well. They get started on insulin, and they never take them off. They never get started on the right med, which probably would be a metformin and some education, but they just start them on insulin, and then they just nothing ever changes other than the dose goes up, right? And they always get fat. And a drug that increases all-cause mortality. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But the ADA keeps pushing this, but I feel like there's one really major secret, and that's something that we were never taught in school, and that was that insulin, that metric, that lab of insulin is what we're not seeing it. No, we're told not to measure it. We're told that we don't have guidelines. We don't have an appropriate assay to be all standardized assay. How much longer do you want to fight over this? Because insulin goes up when disease appears, and we're missing that lab. We're just skipping it, or we're getting a lipid panel. The answer is right in front of them, and we're looking at cholesterol.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think the ADA. Personally, I think as long as you keep taking money from insulin manufacturers and you keep pounding that stupid narrative that insulin is used only to lower glucose, it comes in a vial, right? That I feel like was the biggest little secret.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, insulin. Yeah, insulin is such a busy and active hormone. It affects hundreds of different physiological processes in your body and your brain, and completely disrupts other hormonal cycles as well. It blocks autophagy. It's an anabolic steroid, so it causes tissues to grow, but generally the ones you don't want to grow. Your fat first and foremost. Skin tags, rectal polyps, prostates, uterine fibroids, the muscular layer in your arteries, so they thicken up and you get high blood pressure. This stuff that causes a lot of problems when it's out of balance. Like it's extremely important, as I just illustrated. It affects all these other sorts of things, but you need it in balance. You need it at the right level, and when you bring it up with eating carbohydrates, like a lot of carbohydrates, and your insulin comes up, now it's out of balance for everything else. You've now knocked it out of whack. So it's a really bad idea. And the ADA, they recommend no, you don't need to limit carbohydrates. Just dose your insulin appropriately. Okay, yeah. Well, it's because you're selling insulin. That's the recommendation.
Balance. It's all about balance, right?
Yeah,
oh, sure.
Well,
you got to balance your carbs.
Yeah, well, it's just
you see in the hospital.
That. Like, well, we've used ketogenic diets for hundreds of years for diabetes. I mean, that was the only treatment that we had for type 1 or type 2 diabetes. The only thing that could keep type 1 diabetics alive for any amount of time. Some people,
Yes.
for a protracted period of time, even decades. And then we're trying to say, no, that's fine. No, don't worry about the carbs. We're talking about carbohydrates. We're talking about, blood glucose levels and keeping that down. You know, a really easy way of keeping your blood glucose down: don't eat any
Don't eat it.
carbs. Don't eat glucose. Don't eat it in the first place. Your body will make a very normal amount, and then you just dose your insulin appropriately. Or if with type 2 diabetes, a lot of people are reversing their insulin resistance and hyperglycemia naturally, and coming off, the Harvard studies showed that, all the diabetic patients came off 100% of the diabetics came off 100% of their injectable medications, including
So
insulin.
cool.
And so it's
The
funny too,
money
because,
saved and the amount of prescriptions that you can't fill now because somebody's off of insulin.
yeah. Well,
But what are you using as a tool to help guide these patients as you're removing meds? Like, I know VertaHealth.
yeah,
VertaHealth is kind of where I started. I've been trying to copy them
yeah.
since the beginning. Oh my
Mhm.
gosh. Sarah
Yeah.
Hallberg, Steve Finney, and Jeff Volek. It's
Mhm.
like, oh my gosh,
Oh, they're great.
pioneers. Oh, but I mean, that
Yeah.
was where I started. And it was Sarah Hallberg going, ignore the ADA guidelines. I'm like, what is she talking about? Like, what do you mean? This was in 2015, the 10 Talk. I don't know
Okay.
how many hits it has now, but it's amazing. So I remember looking at it and going, okay, so what's she talking about? Let's look up all these panelists, this committee, that guideline committee, right? Who are these people? There was $750,000 that was split amongst like 20 investigators, right? Like, you
Yeah.
guys, how in the world can you do this? How in the world can ADA allow that? How in the world can ADA? Now, this is really going to piss you off. I'm sure you already know this, but the ADA has only one vegetable, one vegetable, and it's a potato.
Yeah.
Holy cow! Like a broccoli, something else, a
Yeah.
potato. Like,
Yeah.
oh, for
I mean,
a $250,000, to me wouldn't be worth the mud on my face in 10 years time when you go, wait a minute, what were you thinking
yeah.
with a potato?
Yeah. No, I don't know. I mean, I did see one of their recipes on their website where they said, like, "Oh, this is a good recipe for a diabetic," and it was like a cucumber and sweet and sour cucumber salad, right? And so
Yeah.
and part of the recipe was a quarter cup of sugar.
Right.
This
Right.
is like presumably one serving, right? So it's like a
Right.
quarter cup, for one person or something like that. But maybe it was for more people, but quarter cup of sugar, freaking
It's a
quarter
lot.
cup of sugar.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
that sort of ties into, this is the whole bizarre nature of this, because the ADA is teaching people that, no, you don't need to limit carbohydrates. Eat whatever you want. It's fine.
Right.
And then
We'll
just,
cover it.
take more
Cover it with
medication.
insulin. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so,
Yeah.
but it gets worse than that, because I've colleagues of mine who have, had patients before they understood about, low carbohydrate and therapeutic carbohydrate restriction for diabetics, that they would look at their HbA1c and it starts going up and up and up, and it's like, oh gosh, now you're at 8, now you're at 9. Okay, we're going to increase your insulin, and because we need to bring this HbA1c down. So they dose up the insulin, and then they're out of the room, and they don't talk to them again. Then they go to the diabetic care nurse, who says, oh, it looks like the doctor increased your insulin, so we're going to have to increase your daily carbohydrates to cover the
Right.
insulin, because you need
Right.
more insulin because you have high blood sugar. But that's going to drop your blood sugar, so you need more carb to get that blood sugar back up again. It's like, are you actually retarded? Like, I mean, what the hell are
Right.
you thinking?
Or
It's just like, well,
eating a
you
turkey.
need insulin.
Right.
It'd be one thing if, like, you needed insulin for some other reason,
Right.
and okay, well, let's just get your carbs up because you really need this
You need
insulin
to
to
grow or
block
something.
autophagy
Yeah.
and screw up your hormones, right? And so,
Yeah.
let's do that, and then we need to get your carbohydrates up. The whole point was to get your carbohydrates lower, to get your blood sugar lower. And now they're
Right.
saying, well, because you have this insulin, now we got to get those carbs up, and their bloody HbA1c just keeps going up. They get on more and more insulin and more and more insulin. They're eating more and more
Yeah.
carbs, and like you say, they get more and more obese because insulin is the fat storage hormone. That's it.
Yeah.
If you don't have
Blocks
insulin, yeah,
lipolysis. Yep. You're
that's
not
it.
going to burn fat.
You
Exactly.
can't. Yeah, you can't.
Yeah.
And
I mean, some patients be told to eat a sandwich before bed so they don't get hypoglycemic. Like, does this make sense to you? Like, okay,
No.
so maybe just back. But what the big disconnect that started me down this path was there's no education between the
Yeah.
patient and the physician. Like, this is a all encompassing disease.
Mhm.
Diabetes is affected by your thoughts, for example, movement, everything,
Mm.
right? And how in the world are we going to go, all right, you just need this course, 8-hour course. And usually that 8-hour course, which is what I was started teaching a long time ago, is like, this is
Mm.
all about complications of diabetes. This
Mm.
isn't really helpful to keep people off of the
Mm.
medications. This is all about, let me scare the crap out of you so you'll be really compliant, right? So everybody gets
Mhm.
this 8-hour class. So I would do this 8-hour class, and then I'd be like, oh, well, we're done. And they'll be like, well, we'll be back next week. I'm like, well, I don't have any more material. So, okay. I mean, I can't say no to a patient that wants education, right?
Mm.
So here I'm like, okay, I got stuff for you. And that's what set me down this road. And I'm like, wait a minute. These people need help. They need some
Yeah.
sort of guidance out as to how to safely get off of insulin. Because I've
Mm.
had people like, you meet them in the hospital, you're giving them this important information. They go home and do it. And then I'm like, you didn't call me the next morning and their blood sugar is really low. This really should be kind of done under the guidance of someone that's looking at you, right? And knowing what your blood sugar is. And these continuous glucose monitors has been such a game changer because like you can see metabolism in real time and you can interject and you can make adjustments in real time. That's what I love about these things. And then there's a really important part of metabolism that is stress. And I feel like something like these Aura rings, the smart rings, the watches, these things are great tools if we can learn this new language and figure out how we can help them with their daily life to get healthier just by doing everyday little impactful things like, hey, your blood sugar's high, go for a walk. Oh, what a great idea. Oh, that would have been nice to have that on my a little warning. Oh, your blood sugar went up 20%. You probably should go for a walk now. Oh, okay. Like helpful information that's all about patient education. We don't have enough information to give these patients aren't getting it. There's a huge disconnect. How do we fix this disconnect other than what we're doing and trying to convince people to change their diet and lifestyle?
Mm. Well, when I check patients' blood work, well, they come in. We talk about the problems that they have, and a lot of it comes down to metabolic dysfunction, and they may have been putting on weight, they don't feel well, they have low energy and mood, and all these other sorts of things, and a lot of these are a product of a damaged metabolism and metabolic structure and hormones and things like that. So yeah, we do a deep dive into their hormones, and quite often you'll see these patterns, massively elevated, insulin, elevated leptin, the HbA1c may be off, their blood sugar may be off, their thyroid may be down, their testosterone may be in the tank. 38-year-old woman might be going through, early menopause and barely register the amount of insulin that they have. And you can explain these things to them. You can say, listen, this is what these things are doing in your body, or the things that you're eating are affecting these things. You're eating carbohydrates, it's raising your insulin. That insulin is blocking leptin. Insulin is also blocking estrogen production in your ovaries. This is why you're going through early menopause. And you go all the way down and you just start educating them about this. And like, this is how you're feeling. This is what your blood's saying. And we can tie all of this stuff back to the way you're eating. It can be quite convincing for people. And then you show them that and you say, listen, these are the principles. They have an autoimmune disease and say, listen, I don't think it's just go ketogenic. Like, you have diabetes, but you also have Hashimoto's, you have Crohn's disease. It's really important,
Rheumatoid, right?
yeah, that you cut out plants in general, because just the full carnivore diet is really, really powerful for autoimmunity. I think that's because it directly addresses the underlying root cause. I've done a video on that called "The Real Cause of Autoimmunity" or autoimmune diseases, and I think I'm onto something here. I don't think it's an autoimmune disease. I think your body is attacking actually plant toxins, lectins, glyphosate, different sorts of things that get in your body, attack your body. What is you supposed to do, and attacking them? Because when you
Right.
remove those, problem goes away, even though the antibodies are still elevated for years sometimes, just
Hmm.
like in celiac. Celiac, which is called a gluten-mediated autoimmune disease. So meaning that it's only when gluten is stuck to your enterocytes and attacking them and damaging them that your body mounts a response to those, right?
Right.
Which is how so that's not an autoimmune disease, because when you stop eating gluten, the gut completely heals and repairs in 4 to 6 weeks. even though the antibodies stay elevated for over 3 years, right? So that those
Mm-hmm.
antibodies are not attacking your body, they're attacking the gluten that is stuck to your
Right.
body, and you're getting hit in the crossfire. I think that's what other autoimmune issues are as well, and I sort of go into
Yeah.
that. But, I go into that more in that video, but, when I talk to them, it's just like, "Listen, this is you change your diet, this is gonna affect this autoimmunity, it's gonna affect the diabetes, it's gonna affect the leptin, it's gonna affect, your hormones, it's gonna affect X, Y, and Z, and all the way down the chain."
Right.
And then, B12 could be just staggeringly low. Is something you probably know about is that the reference
Yeah.
ranges for lab tests are just an average. So just an
Yeah.
average for the population that comes in. And so that's
The
why every
sick
single lab.
population.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a sick population. So you're comparing yourself to the average person who is sick, overweight, malnourished. And each and every
Mhm.
different lab in your own town and all around the world, they all have different reference ranges. So that's obviously not an optimal reference range. It's just an average reference range. They don't even try to say it's an optimal reference range. There's certain things that
Yeah.
are pre-agreed upon. Well, this is the cutoff for diabetes and pre-diabetes, or this is where your cholesterol should be. The rest of them are averages, basically, for most of them. And so when you have 80% of the calories in America and most of the Western world being taken in from plant-based foods. Most of those processed plants, but still
Mm-hmm.
plants, and plants do not contain B12.
Mm-hmm.
You can expect the average to go down because the average person, the most people, are going to be B12 deficient. That's exactly what I see. See this
Right.
reference range that it only encompasses disease. Most of them don't even get into what has been shown through research studies to be an optimal reference range.
Mm-hmm.
They don't, so they're completely out of that range for most of these things. And so I show them
Yeah.
that, and they're like, listen, they have low energy. They're having, all this brain fog and all these sorts of things. And their doctor's like, you may be low on B12. And they go and check it, and they're like, oh, okay, no, it's, 200, picomoles per liter. Oh, that's
Mhm.
fine. It's well within the range. Oh, that's cute, because Oxford University published a study in 2008 that showed that people that had less than about 350 picomoles per liter sustained over 5 years, that on MRI, their brain shrank by over 5% volume, right?
Wow.
Well, the demyelination causes damage to your axon, the myelination of your axons, which is your white matter, and that matter actually shrinks down. So that is a critical deficiency that people are getting brain damage from. And we're just saying that's normal. This is why most vegans say, like, oh, my B12 is
Yeah.
fine. Man, you look
Oh.
fine, and so I can look at that, and their doctor says, oh yeah, you're fine. And I say, like, that's a critical deficiency. We need to get that up. And so then you're switching to meat, and there's more B12 and all these things. And so a lot of it is just dietary in nature. Some of the people, may need some, medication support, but it's like 95% of it is done with diet and lifestyle. And the
Yeah.
other 5% just sort of fill in the
Yeah.
gaps with medications, and people feel a lot better. And, I have a very front heavy practice. There's a lot of education and time spent with a
Yeah.
patient early on. And I get them and I tell them, like, look, this is my practice model, is that I want to get you educated into a position that you don't need me, and you're just
Yeah.
healthy, and you
Right.
just go away, I'll see
Right.
you
You
once a
fixed
year.
your
That's not a
lifestyle.
problem.
Enjoy it.
Yeah, that's it. And so,
Yeah.
like, now you're healthy, which is how people are supposed to be. All life on Earth is
Yeah.
inherently healthy. It's just external influences that make them unhealthy. There's no such thing
Mhm.
as a sickly population or a sickly species. It's just not
Right.
possible. Not inherently genetically, right? Because we're
Right.
all descended from the winners. We're all descended from the people and the animals and the insects and the trees that survived. They were the fittest for purpose. They were the ones that
Yeah.
made it. You're not going to have an entire population that are just sick and falling apart and getting osteoporosis at 30 and just dying and
Yeah.
decaying. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Oh,
And
but
so,
wait. But we didn't have the ability to diagnose this back then. So
yeah,
that's
exactly.
why, like, oh,
Yeah,
I can't stand that argument.
that's
That
so
just
stupid. Well, yeah.
irks
Well, I
me.
mean, it's so dumb. I mean, they said it in the 90s. I remember it when it happened.
You
They
still
started
hear
talking
it.
about. Yeah, well, like, you remember, like, when back in the 80s, and before that, type 2 diabetes wasn't called type 2 diabetes. It was called adult
Yeah.
onset diabetes, and there's
Don't know.
juvenile diabetes.
Yeah.
And then I remember as a kid in the 90s that all of a sudden I remember it on the news. They said, it's just like, wow, there's this 10-year-old kid who has adult onset diabetes, but he's a kid. How can a kid
Right.
get adult onset diabetes? And
Right.
he's got fatty liver disease. Only alcoholics get fatty livers. These kids never had a drop of
Yes.
alcohol in his life. He's 10. And so instead of thinking about it for 1 second, say, wait, what changed? And actually being
Right.
scientists and responsible medical professionals, they just said, it's probably happening all the time. We just didn't notice. It's just like
We're just
we probably
better
just
at
missed that.
diagnosing it.
Yeah, well, it's
We
just
just
like,
talk. If we test everybody,
yeah,
we'll probably find it, right?
yeah, well, that's it.
All these
It's
kids.
well, because diabetic ketoacidosis is such a subtle diagnosis. It could very
Yeah,
well be that this kid who we thought
sure.
had DKA and lost 20 pounds in a week and was extremely dehydrated and was drinking water out of the toilet because he was so
So thirsty.
thirsty that it came in and almost died and he was completely acidotic and his lactate through the
Uh,
roof. That was
right.
probably just type 2. We just didn't realize it.
Yeah.
It's
Really?
just it's like,
Uh huh.
no, come on. Like, you trying to fool me or you? Like, what is going
Right.
on here?
How
And then,
how is this drug still available? I mean, it increased
yeah,
in type 2 diabetics. You have high
mm,
insulin. Why are you still giving it?
well,
That
that's
should
it.
never be.
Yeah,
That's what I'm
yeah,
saying. ADA has been pushing this. I think ADA is
yeah,
the one responsible for this.
probably.
How many people
Yeah,
are you killing?
yeah,
Especially like think of the cancer rates that are associated with
mm,
hyperinsulinemia. Like
mm,
you talk about anabolism, right? Like
yeah,
how are you triggering this? And then you add things like obesity, which is kind of a hypoxic state.
mm,
Like what cancer loves that.
mm-hmm,
You
yeah.
you and I have a mutual friend, Dr. Thomas Siegfried. That's
Oh, yeah,
he's
yeah.
amazing.
That
Yes.
is great.
I love his work. And I've been able to share a lot of that, and it makes sense.
Yeah,
But it can contribute to like why do we see such increases in cancer?
mm,
And
yeah,
you used to tear this out, right?
yeah,
You did the surgeries for
yeah,
GBM
yeah,
or yeah,
yeah.
like that is
GBM,
fast.
yeah,
GBM is amazing.
yeah.
I
That's the
had
most
I had
common. Yeah,
I had one
primary
patient,
error. Yeah.
yeah, that I met at a bar, and it was during COVID. And he's like,
Mm,
"Hey, what do you think I should do? I got 6 months to live." He had a astrocytoma. Does that sound
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
And I go, "Well, like when you're doing ketogenic, everything starts to look like a nail, right?" And
yes,
you're like, I bet
yeah.
this will work.
You just,
Yeah,
when you're doing
he's
keto, everything looks like a carb. I'm like, kill it. Yeah, yeah.
yes, get rid of it.
No.
Yeah, so like he's still around. He's
Yeah,
still
wow.
there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I
Yeah.
bet you've had a lot of amazing cures. I've been
Yeah.
utilizing what
Well,
you're talking about with the autoimmune disease, suggesting carnivore to a lot of people with autoimmune disease, and
mm,
it's been nothing but success.
yeah,
Nothing
it's
but
pretty
success.
crazy.
It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Uh,
Rheumatoid, you name it.
yeah. Yeah. No, it is amazing. I have yet to see an autoimmune condition that doesn't respond extremely favorably to this. And, and if that's correct, that our body's actually not being attacked by our antibodies, but are being attacked by lectins, plant toxins, glyphosates, industrial toxins, and all whatever, then just like it is in celiac disease, then that makes sense. You get rid of the gluten, and the celiac goes away, even though the antibodies are raised. So if you stop eating this garbage, you stop getting this filth in your body, it stops attacking your body, and your body stops attacking it. And so that
And you
that
see
makes sense to
white
me.
counts drop. WBCs drop. White counts drop, huh? Inflammatory
And
markers improve.
yeah, and well, absolutely across the board. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Like CREC, high sensitivity CRP, ESR. Even people's ferritin can be an acute phase
Yes.
reactant and can get elevated just due to inflammation, and then all of a sudden that comes down and normalizes. I mean, I've had people that were phenotypically hemochromatosis, right? So they just these ferritin levels just went up, 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 and they were getting iron overload. So they had to give blood every 2-3 months
Right.
for years, just consistently. They had to give it. So some had genetically hemochromatosis, others didn't, but they all expressed this where they had to get blood draws every couple of months. I I of my patients, and there's only a handful of those, every single one now has completely normal ferritin and don't need to give blood anymore. And I've been
Oh,
spoken to Dr. Baker and other people who do this, and they're seeing the same thing. Is it going to do that for everybody? Not necessarily, but it certainly has with some of these people. So what is that with some people? Is it's going to be massively elevated, inflammation. So they're storing or sequestering iron in their ferritin, which is a storage form of iron. And your body does that in an inflamed state to try to get it away from bacteria and other pathogens that would use that against you.
Feed it, right?
Yeah, and so inflammation comes down and antibodies come down because you can track certain antibodies pretty easily, like Hashimoto's. It's very straightforward, or Graves' disease. You can test these things in a very straightforward manner. And I have a patient right now who has Graves' disease, and we're tracking their antibodies, and they're sort of steadily coming down. But antibodies take a long time. Like I said, with celiac, it takes 3 years. Those antibodies can stay elevated. You look at your titers for different antibodies, you typically keep some amount of antibody production, even if you haven't been exposed to that pathogen for years, right? And so, that's because you're just keeping this baseline level there. So just in case it comes back, you can then grow and mount that response.
Mount the response, right?
Yeah. And so that would be the same with autoimmunity, I think, because your body's not treating this like an infection, right? I mean, when was the last time you heard of relapsing and remitting, staph infection?
Autoimmune?
I mean, like you're not, you know what I mean? Like you have an abscess.
I always think about the host. I always think about the host. What's the vulnerability of the host for this to take hold? Are we weak? Right?
Yeah, yes.
Like what is it? Is it seed or soil?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the thing is too, I mean, think about it this way. And then that's part of your innate immunity. Your body is able to fight these things off. And so they go from just sort of these opportunistic infections, like normally it just stays in balance, but then all of a sudden your immune system drops, something goes, and all of a sudden it just goes crazy. You get weird little parasites and fungal infections when your
out of nowhere
immune system gets too low. And but long before that, you're getting these bacterial, viral sort of things, right? So but when did your body act like that with any infection? The principal argument behind autoimmunity is that your body screws up and all of a sudden thinks of your body or body part as an infection.
Foreign.
So it's trying to attack that infection. Okay. How does your body attack infections? Does it sort of attack it for a while and then just sort of, I'm tired, and just take a break for a couple of months or a few days, or just take the weekend off, and then come out and come attack it again or whatever? No, because you'd be dead. Your body is a full court press. You massively elevate your whites, and then you just go attack until either you or it are dead, because those are the stakes. If you have one of these infections, if you have a pneumonia, if you have a septic, you have an abscess in your neck, right? Your body's going to attack that until it can contain it and try to stop it, right?
Yeah.
Well, if it's thinking your thyroid is an abscess, it's not behaving as such. You should see those antibodies just go up and up and up and up and up and never come down. And that's exactly the opposite of what's happening. We already see this normally. They can go up, they can go down without immunosuppressants. But when you go on a carnivore diet, when you're a plant-free ketogenic diet, you cut out everything, especially everything except ruminant meat, because of that rumination process ferments and breaks down these toxins and can potentially even break down glyphosate, which is strongly associated with autoimmunity. And so if you're just really eating that and nothing else, you're not bringing these toxins in the first place. And what happens? The antibodies come down, and we track this, and it can take a year and a half, 2 years before those things can come down to a trace level. But it happens, and we can see this in real time. Someone, I had a patient who went to Italy and just came back and just feeling like garbage. We checked his numbers again. His thyroid was in the tank. His antibodies are just shot up by hundreds of points, right? We're like, well, there you go. And then all of a sudden, because the antibodies will show up because it's mounting a new response. It will mount that response very quickly, but it'll take a long time for them to come down. So you really do have to be.
But the symptoms typically are gone pretty quick. I mean,
you can't. Well, as far as the antibodies are concerned. So the thing is symptoms, if you cut this garbage out of your system, if that theory is true, my theory is true, that your body's actually, the antibodies are actually attacking something else, and you get those out. Yes, you can clear those quicker. I mean, there's some people that it takes a while to clear these things. They still have these lingering symptoms for a while, but eventually it just comes down, even though the antibodies are still elevated. But to have
Right.
that, those antibodies come down, it means that they're not going to start coming down if there's something to attack. They're
Right.
going to go up. And so as soon
Right.
as you start see them coming down, that's a pretty good indication that
You've
you've
done the
cleared
right
the
thing.
garbage out of your system. Yeah, and
Yeah.
then the antibodies are coming down because they don't need to be there. Your body's very
Right.
efficient. It's not going to waste energy pumping out a bunch of antibodies towards nothing, right? And so, that's what you should see, but it takes a while. Like any autoimmune or any immune process, it's gonna take a while to get those
Take a while.
antibodies down. But yeah, no,
Do you
we absolutely see that.
do you see other symptoms associated with an excessive plant diet, like oxalate toxicity, obviously lectins, nightshades? Do you see much of this in your practice? And if so, like, what do you say to convince them that, hey, these plants are just wreaking
Mhm.
havoc on your GI tract, and that's why you
Yeah.
have X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can show. I mean, one of the more insidious, but I think more important issues with plants and their toxins is that they have a lot of things called anti-nutrients, things that
Right.
block out the absorption and digestion and then absorption of nutrients,
Right.
or even get into your bloodstream and strip out nutrients. So it's like oxalates, it's in the form of oxalic
Yes.
acid and spinach. If anyone's ever used oxalic acid, you use it to get rust off the side of your house. Right? So you put some oxalic acid, you dilute it down really
Ah,
far in
I'm
water,
gonna rub
and then you
spinach
spray
all
that.
over
Yeah,
my house.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
I
so
don't look at
that strips that off.
I don't look at plants the same because of
Mm.
you.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
I'm like
Well,
it's an that's the enemy. I swear, I would never put that in my mouth again. I will. You
yeah.
cannot get me to eat spinach. You couldn't get me to
No,
eat
God, no.
sugar. After I
No, yeah,
saw that 2012 Robert Lustig
yeah,
UCSF talk about sugar, I'm like, whoa, we didn't
yeah, that was
know
great.
the mechanism of fructose metabolism.
Mm,
Then I'm like, no, yeah, that's Roundup. That's as bad as glyphosate, right? That's
mhm.
poison.
It's
That's a
terrible.
toxin. It should be under lock and key.
Mm. Should certainly be age restricted.
Oh, for
Absolutely.
sure.
And,
If alcohol and cigarettes are, absolutely.
yeah. Well, it's addictive. It's a known addictive substance, right? Because they've shown
Substance.
that
You didn't
sugar is
say
more
food
addictive.
intentionally. It's not
Yeah.
food. You said
No, it's
substance,
not.
like a controlled
That's
substance,
not.
huh? A
Yeah.
Schedule One.
Well, absolutely. Well, look at this. I
Yeah,
mean, they
it's
did,
addictive.
animal studies. They
Harmful.
showed that, they put a food pellet and a button that will give them mine's a
Yes.
food pellet, one will give them a cocaine pellet,
Right.
but they can only get one, right? And so they just once they figure out which one it is, they keep going for the cocaine until they die, and then they
Right.
added in a third switch, which was sugar, and they actually picked sugar
Over the
until they
cocaine.
died over the cocaine and the food, right?
Yeah.
Then Dr. Lustig has shown different studies. One of which was where they did MRIs on people that were like meth addicts, and they found that obviously this goes to the dopamine
Right.
receptors in the brain and the reward and addiction centers in your brain, stimulates those excessively, so you feel all
Yeah.
bright and awake and manic.
Right.
And but eventually it starts to kill these things because dopamine is excitatory, and when your neurons are excited and turned on, they're actually damaging themselves. The neurotransmitters, the breakdown products of neurotransmitters, are actually toxic to your neurons, which is
Right.
crazy way to design anything, but
Right.
like that's what we got, and that's why you need to
But it
sleep. That's why
works.
you need to turn these things off. It does work. It works great, but that's why you need to cycle these things off. You need to turn these cells off. They
Yeah.
need to build and repair, because every minute you're awake, you get low grade brain damage, and now you're just forcing the on switch and just go 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 as your body starts reducing receptors. So that's tolerance. So you need more and more and more to get the same effect. And so you're like, well, I want to get where I'm going. So they take more and more and more. And so this causes serious damage and eventually causes permanent damage and it kills those cells. And that's addiction, because now you're not getting really any response unless you take the meth or whatever. And a lot of people, doing my training, and even in high school, you see these people, meth addicts, coke addicts, heroin addicts, they wouldn't even say like, yeah, I just like getting high all the time. They say like, I have to do this just to feel normal. I don't feel human. I
Yeah.
don't feel
Yeah.
normal unless I have this. And people think, well, that's just because they're so used to being high. That's what they consider normal. But if you think about it, it's actually because they have basically no dopamine response left naturally, and so they
And they
have to make
wonder
this
why they're
massive
depressed.
hit. Yeah, exactly, and they're just miserable, and they just feel like they're just this shell of themselves.
Yeah.
With or without the withdrawals, they just feel horrible, and then they take it, and they're like, "Oh, okay, I can function again." And
So
so they did this study.
we can't live a
Yeah.
life walking around with 10x dopamine all the time. I
No,
mean,
yeah,
why
probably
not?
no,
Just,
yeah,
everything's great. Right?
yeah, no,
There's a
sounds
slippery
good.
slope on the, I don't know what sugar does to dopamine. I don't know if it's like a two and
No,
a half. I think
yeah,
it's a two, it's over two. It's over
fructose.
doubling.
Yeah, so fructose gives a dopamine response, and people say, "Well, giving someone a hug gives dopamine."
Yeah.
It's like not
Yes.
not to the same amount, like not to the same degree
Maybe a
whatsoever.
little oxytocin there too.
Y
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly, and so, but fructose so Lustig talked about this study with fructose and meth addicts. So I got these meth addicts, they've actually just killed and destroyed these parts of the brain. They give them, like, some sort of amphetamine, like a Vyvanse or whatever,
Right.
and, we give it to a normal person, that doesn't have any of these issues, and those areas in the brain would just light up like a Christmas tree, right?
Right.
And then they give that same dose to a meth addict, and it barely twinkles.
Dims. Huh. Nothing.
Yeah, but then they gave that same dose to a sugar addict who was metabolically sick. Same barely twinkle as the meth addict, right? So
Right.
there was enough of a dopamine response from fructose to actually kill those cells in the reward centers of your brain, just like cocaine, heroin, and meth. And so this is as addictive as these drugs, and it causes the same or a similar damage to the reward centers, kills these areas of the brain, and it also gets metabolized in the liver down the same pathway, same biochemical pathway as alcohol. So you get the same
Right.
byproducts from processing sugar as you do from processing alcohol. And so you get fatty liver, you get all the same problems. You get fatty liver disease, you get cirrhosis, you get diabetes, you get heart disease. It's even implicated in Alzheimer's and cancer. So
Right.
this is a drug. I mean, it is as fully addictive as these hard drugs, and is damaging to the body in a similar manner as alcohol. So this is a horrible, horrible substance to put in your body.
Yeah.
And yet we're giving it to kids. We're putting it in baby formula and everything. And we have all these holidays around just giving kids just buttloads of
Yeah.
candy. And we wonder why they have these problems. And,
Right.
and developmental issues are becoming much more prevalent. And we're just feeding them drugs. And I mean, that was the
I,
thing we were talking about. We were talking about, just getting better at diagnosis. You can say that once. They said that in the
right.
90s. They said that with autism. They said that with diabetes. They
Yeah.
said that with
Still saying
cancer.
it.
They said that with all
Yes.
these sorts of things. All across,
Yeah.
they all started going up at the same time. Okay, was that because we just paid attention? Just every doctor before that was
Hmm.
retarded? I don't know about
Right.
that. I mean, like
Right.
Leonardo da Vinci was pretty smart, and he had all these sorts of, had volumes of books that he wrote, and he doesn't talk about any of these sorts of things in there. We have people that Nobel Prize winners that were doing amazing things, and
John
they would have
Yudkin.
known this thing. Yeah, exactly. And they would
Yeah.
have people. Well, and Warburg. I mean, this is a Nobel Prize winner.
Yeah.
This guy was so brilliant that he was an openly homosexual Jewish man in Nazi Germany, and Hitler left him alone. Just said, "You just keep doing your thing," right? And so it's
Yay.
like that's how, groundbreaking this guy's work was. And, I'm sorry, but he would have seen this shit. He was
Right.
studying cancer
Right.
most of his career, and he made these massive, massive breakthroughs. Like, he's going to be seeing a massive uptick in cancer rates.
Right.
He's going to. Those people are going to. And so they said that in the 90s. But you get to say it once because they said in the 90s, but then in the 2000s, it started going up again. Oh, what's this? Oh, it's just we're getting better at diagnosing.
Right.
Okay,
Sure.
what about in the 2010s when it went up again? We're just getting good at diagnosing. What about the 2020? Oh, it's just getting better at diagnosing.
Right.
No, it's going up. We started paying attention in the 90s by your
Hmm.
estimation. You're saying, yeah, we're looking now, we're diagnosing
Right.
now. Okay, great. Well, now we're doing screening, all that sort of stuff. And it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And the interesting thing is, if you look at, like, say, autism, it's not about how many people were diagnosed with autism in the 1970s. How many people who were alive in the 1970s and are alive now have been diagnosed with autism now as adults, because if you have some sort of if you have a different
They
sort of
wouldn't have gone away, right?
yeah, that's it. If you have a different sort of diagnosis criteria, maybe you say, okay, well, we call this now. GBM is a perfect example. They change what they want to consider a GBM all the time. Is it grade 4 astrocytoma, or is it a G, or is this or this is that? Looking at the methylation status, looking at the mutant or wild type, and all these sorts of things. That changes. That changes what we consider a GBM right now. Okay, so right now we're considering certain spectrum of disorders called autism. People in their 70s, people 70 or between 70 and 80. Right now, the autism rate in that decade of life is 1 in 10,000.
Right.
Whereas now the new generation coming up, it's 1 in, I think, 34 in America. It's 1 in 22 males. And no, I'm sorry. It's just, that is not a diagnostic issue.
Yeah.
When we were growing up, 1 in 22 kids did
No
not
way.
have a
No way.
serious learning difficulty like that.
I didn't know anybody. You didn't know any. I didn't know anybody.
I mean, the first time I heard about autism was when I saw Rain Man. That was it. And
That's autism. That's what they do, huh?
And looking back, there was one kid at our school in junior high who, looking back, I would say he's probably high functioning, autistic savant. He
little
had
strange.
crazy
That's about
math
it.
skills and things like that.
Yeah.
But he could still socialize and things like that. He was on the wrestling team and all that sort of stuff. But there was just something a little quirky about him. Looking back, I'd say that's it. That was one kid in the whole school.
Yeah. I don't know how many kids you'd seen, hundreds of thousands. I didn't see it. I just didn't. And it wasn't like I was missing it. But now it's like every family has it.
That's it.
There's somebody there, or they know somebody. This isn't right.
Yeah.
But the vaccine schedule. What are you, man, we're going to get ourselves probably taken off the air for this, but I think it's still worth this discussion. What do you think about RFK? I mean, obviously he has some great plans here. Are we going to see value-based medicine come back? Are we going to help the children, and then we will get help? Just kind of, or do you just take the snack aisle and just no children allowed? And you have to have a card to get in and buy your garbage. I don't know. What do you envision? Because your practice, according to this value-based medicine, and I've been told this too, you're hurting butts and beds, right? The hospital isn't going to get paid as much, right? And under value-based medicine, actually, your lifestyle practice should be worth a lot, because you're reversing disease. We should be getting paid for outcomes. That's a positive outcome that's of some value now. What's your hope, and what do you think?
Well, I mean, the thing is I think one of the things that RFK is doing is he's opening the dialogue back up. He's allowing it to be discussed openly, because previously, I haven't looked into all that sort of stuff with autism and vaccines and things like that. I mean, I think that when I started looking at the vaccine schedule, and there's just sort of adding things to it, and there's like a chicken pox vaccine. Like, why do you need to vaccinate against that? Like, that's not hurting anybody.
TB.
Yeah.
Gates, Bill Gates wants a TB vaccine. He's spent $200 million.
Jesus.
Why?
Yeah, like, why? When was the last time someone in America got TB?
But we've got meds that work. Just if you want to do something helpful, clean up the water and the sanitation.
Well,
and get people
also
real food.
100%. I mean, that Jay Salisbury would put people on a pure beef and water diet in the 1800s, and that was getting people's immune system up and ready to go so that they could fight off TB. He specifically used that for TB, as well as autoimmune diseases and other sorts of things. But the TB vaccine doesn't even prevent TB. It just prevents miliary TB, where it sort of metastasizes around your body and you just get completely destroyed by it. So that's what it's supposed to prevent or help protect from. But it's not even a guarantee. That's not even a guarantee. But it doesn't prevent TB. And if there's no TB in America endemic in the population, like, why are we worried about this? Like, what are we doing? And
or cervical cancer and HPV. I mean, everybody should have. boys and girls, everyone should have it. Cervical cancer doesn't get that many people. It's 1 in 20,000 actually die from it. It's a slow growing cancer. Like
Yeah.
you could get this on Pap smear way ahead of time, but
Yeah.
we're still doing this.
Yeah. I mean,
Why?
and yeah, I don't understand this. I mean, well, I do understand it. I mean, because when you get people get something on the vaccine schedule, it's you have a captive market, right? They can't go anywhere, right? They have to get your vaccine. So, that's a very good business model to get a vaccine, get a vaccine, get a vaccine, get a vaccine, pay a bunch of money, pay off a bunch of politicians to lobby, and
Right.
pay off a bunch of doctors to say how necessary and good this is. To stop people from getting chicken pox was, oh goodness, it's just an epidemic of chicken pox and people being itchy for 5 days, and and they're saying that, and so you get that onto the schedule,
Yeah.
and then it's just money in the bank,
And no
So now,
liability. You're
well,
not going
that's
to
it.
get
I
sued.
mean,
It's just
that is
bullshit.
insane. That should never have existed. I mean, that's the first thing that needs to go,
Yeah.
is
That's
taking
why
away the immunity from
Pfizer.
liability. I mean, that is insane. Like, how could you not?
Mhm.
If you have that, you are just asking for a problem. Say it's like, hey, you can just put out a vaccine. Doesn't matter what it does. Doesn't matter what the
Yeah.
harm is.
Right.
You're
Right.
immune from all liability. Absolutely not,
Yeah.
because now you can just go out and just, you put some dishwater into a syringe and just be like,
Don't care what happens.
whatever, can't
And
sue
when
me.
you sue a trust, which comes from the government. You're suing the government for someone else's really,
Yeah. Yeah, we're sort of
lack
suing
lack of
ourselves.
safety. Yeah, like
Yeah.
why would you want to sue yourself? But what's frustrating is like this is how many more children need to be affected? How much longer is this going to go on? If we're really going to have transparency in medicine, it needs to be independently reviewed. We need to actually have the safety data in front of us.
Mm.
And VAERS is broken. I'm sure they said, oh, well, we'll just invent this VAERS program and we'll do all the safety data through this post-marketing data. Like, really? I don't know how many times you fill out a VAERS, but it takes a long
Oh, it's
time.
a pain in the ass. Yeah.
And you're liable for, and you don't get paid for it. Like, I'm going to do this after work for a couple hours because I
Yeah.
got to get all this lab data to put in here. It's like, it's
No, it
not
doesn't.
working. It's
Yeah.
not with the best interest of the
Yeah.
children.
No, Harvard did a study, I think it was 2018, that looked at the VAERS system and see like how many people are actually reporting things. They're actually required to, like if there's a
Right.
serious adverse effect,
Who
you're
uses
actually
it?
obligated to do so. Of those people, it's less than 10%. Less than
Yeah.
10%
I
of
was
people
gonna
actually
say.
did this. So this is being largely ignored. And then in certain periods, in the last few years, the reports were there was actually probably less than 1%, because there was overt coercion to not report it. And I saw that in my hospital as well. We'd have patients that would have done that or something like that, and they come in with a massive brain hemorrhage, and that night or that next day, and it's a massive brain hemorrhage. I remember there's this one case where, and they could thrombocytopenic, which is a known consequence of this, and so their platelets are really down. They can't control any sort of bleeding, and then all of a sudden they get this little bleed, massive brain hemorrhage, and we can't operate because platelets are under 100. We can't maintain them. We're just giving bag after bag after bag after bag of
Yeah.
platelets, not working. Go up to 40 and then just drop right back down to 0. And so we couldn't operate. And this person, as there was a lady, she actually ended up dying. We couldn't save her. We couldn't even attempt to save her. And that was sort of the evening of, or the next day. It was very closely in proximity with this. And I remember talking to some of the guys in the ICU, and they were like, "Look, this is a big deal. This is going to be in the news. People are going to be all upset. We're going to have to report this, and the other." The head of the department just said, "Absolutely not. It's 100%
Over.
safe and effective. This definitely wasn't from this, and so no one's allowed to report it." It was like, excuse me, like
Yeah, it's
how would you
never been
know?
proven. Never been
Yeah,
proven.
how would you know?
Right.
There's no long-term
We
data.
have to do the autopsy.
Nothing's 100%.
I
Nothing
know.
is
I try
100%.
to explain that to people, like, okay, do you realize in order to figure out if the shots are causing autism, we would have to sacrifice the child. Like, we have to give it, sacrifice. Oh, it didn't work. Like, come on, there really is no great way to measure this other than, like, the whole point of epidemiological studies and correlation is to dig further if there is an association. Let's dig. Let's look at this a little bit more carefully. So I'm interested to see what you think far as RFK's take on fixing the children and whether or not this is going to have, if it's going to trickle out into all of us and all of our society and all of our food, or should we just, this is my idea, it's been like this for a long time, let's get rid of all the subsidized crops. I'm sure you wouldn't have a problem with that.
No.
Especially sugar.
I think we just get rid of all subsidies and nonsensical foreign aid. I mean, we're just sending trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars to people who hate us to prop up, tin pot dictatorships or some sort of ridiculous regime that can't support itself and off the backs of their people. Terrible idea. But get rid of them. I mean, the government is not designed to be in the business of picking winners and losers. They're supposed to stay the hell out of it. They're supposed to be the arbiters. So, if you're playing a game against the ref, you will always lose. Like there's no competition.
Yeah. Especially when you piss them off.
Yeah, exactly. So, you have to have the government outside of that. They can't be the ones, picking that. For 150 years, that worked great. We had the largest growth in the standard and quality of the quality of living of the lowest quintile in the population. The poorest of the poor improved the most. They improved that quicker than at any other point in history in any other part of the world in the 1800s in America. And that's not to say that was perfect, but we weren't doing things according to the Constitution. Everything should have been applied to everybody. Right. That was a big mistake right from the get-go. But
and the USDA recommending foods, that was a huge problem too.
That's it. And then like in the 1930s, we had the the New Deal, and we just said, okay, well now we have to intervene. Keynesian economics was in vogue at the time. And they were like, well, this is just what you have to do deficit spending, and this will help. When was the last time you got yourself out of debt by maxing out your credit card bills after you lose your job?
Because you made a whole bunch of great investments, right? Sure.
That's it. It's just, it's so silly. And, they would have make work projects. They would send a whole bunch of people out, pay them to dig a massive ditch, and then pay them to fill it back up again. It's just like, how is that benefiting anybody? Well, we have to get them work. And it's like, at least get them to do something functional and necessary. But it's just ridiculous. So, or stay the hell out. Stay the hell out of the way, because obviously, what you're doing is not helping people. And since then it's sort of been broken. They made this rule that said, there was in the Constitution is very clear, you're not allowed. The federal government is not allowed to spend any money on specific special interests. It has to be for the general welfare of the society, of the population. So like border security, national defense, those sorts of things, infrastructure. That's it. And and so then they said, well, or had the Supreme Court break the Constitution by saying, well, if I help Kyle, he's going to spend it over here, and that's going to pay other people, and that's going to do other things, and that's just going to spread out, and that will help everybody, And so they broke the Constitution with that, and instantly you had money in politics, because now there was money that they could splash around, So if you pay a politician, give them a bunch of money, then what happens? They can just now direct federal funding to your special interest, to your company, to your whatever, and now they're picking winners and losers. Now you're getting subsidies, now you're getting this, now you're getting sweetheart deals, now you're getting land deals, and this is and that. And so that's when things really sort of took a turn for the worse. And everyone talks about how money in politics is a really bad idea. That's sort of when it started. And really went crazy after that. The thing with RFK is, you don't have to agree with everything that he says. He's not trying to put down dictates. He's just saying, hey, let's just look at it.
Let's look at the data.
Let's look at the data, because we have not been doing that. And we have not been allowed to do that, because if you go against the narrative, which is largely pushed by the drug companies for these sorts of things, because they just make billions, really trillions off of these things. And yeah, all these things, just the whole gamut. And so they're making trillions of dollars off of this, and they'll be damned if they're going to give that up. And because they've made trillions, they have a big war chest as a whole group.
They've amassed a fortune. Yes.
They have. And so, and they make a lot of money too. So they can just really lobby and push for this sort of stuff. And so people that ever question this, it's just the attack, force came out. You're crazy. You're a loony. They try to get him discredited.
Conspiracy theorists.
Medical
Yes.
license taken away. Yeah, exactly. And so, this is just opening that up and just saying, hey, let's just look at it. Let's just see where the data goes. No one should be opposed to that. No one should be opposed. It's not saying, hey, these are really bad and these are horrible. I mean, I'm sure some of them are great. However, are all 75 necessary? Are all of them just doing absolutely nothing and not causing any harm whatsoever?
Right.
I mean, I don't know what harm that's doing, but I want to know if it is. That's just being responsible. You need to look into it.
Looking at the data and really presenting it in such a way that people would understand.